Well, it is probably no shock to you if you're watching my channel or a fellow van dweller's channel that the van life phenomenon has kind of exploded over the past few years. And before I embarked on my journey, I really turned to YouTube and social media to try and figure out the best ways to go about van life and how to navigate that. And one thing that I found as a recurring thing is not a lot of videos really talked about the cons of van life. So I thought that I would do a video today about some of the real honest questions that I had to answer on my journey about whether or not I wanted to continue doing this, whether or not I wanted to do this in the first place, and just kind of talk about some of the things that really threw me for a loop and really tested me as a person, as an individual. So I want to share that today with all of you. I'm going to start with the things that YouTube really doesn't talk about. Other van dwellers, van lifers, what have you, they really don't talk about these things, which I think for someone that's starting out or is thinking about doing this is a little bit misleading, because it's not always sunshine and rainbows and sunsets and going to these really cool places. Sometimes it really sucks. Some of the cons that I have as far as being in the van, physically living in the van, number one is going to be a lack of storage. For one person, having the access to storage and finding different little places to put everything, that can get a little bit tricky and troublesome. You really have to place things in your van that you may need pretty regularly, and things that you might not need all the time, you kind of have to find a secondary place where you might have to work to get them, if that makes sense. Another one is just not having a bathroom or running water available to you. So not having that access to, especially hot water, is a big one. Not having hot water to bathe, to shower, to cook with. Any water that you do have, you have to heat up, whether that be on your stove or on a fire or whatever. You kind of have to be okay with not bathing every day. I like to do bird baths, and then maybe once or twice a week I will try to take a full shower, just to really, depending on where I'm at and what I'm doing, how dirty I am. Not having access to that, it gets old, and you kind of start to feel dirty. So this is a really big one that I knew along certain lines that I would have to deal with at a certain point, and that is weather. Depending where you're at in the country, you have to be able to adapt to extremely cold weather, extremely hot weather. If you're in a very tumultuous part of the country where they experience tornadoes, thunderstorms, earthquakes, things like that, that takes a toll on you. When you are stuck in your van all day because it's raining or because the weather's just really bad or it's snowing, how are you going to navigate that? How are you going to keep yourself occupied? And how are you going to keep yourself safe in those situations? One of my biggest things that I had to deal with was just extreme heat. Texas and in Florida and Louisiana and Mississippi, the heat and the humidity is torture. When it's that hot out, you have to have your windows down to a certain degree because you have to get some form of fresh air in. And it's just killer. It was very testing for me when I was in that type of climate. If you've watched any of my videos when I was in Texas and when I was in South Florida, it was kind of driving me crazy because I just felt like I could never get relief. It takes a toll on you mentally and physically to be constantly sweating, to be constantly drenched, even when you're not wearing much, to just be sleeping or trying to sleep in humid conditions is just, it's really tough. And it was not something that I was expecting to deal with on that level. Along those same lines, you have to deal with bugs, you have to deal with dirt, you have to deal with sand. When I was in New Mexico, I was in a dust storm. I had to sleep with a mask on because even with my windows just being a little bit cracked, the dust and the sand was blowing into the van, and I could taste it in my mouth like a crunch. When you get sand in your mouth at the beach, that crunch, that was me all night, even with a mask on. That was definitely something that I wasn't prepared for. I did not expect to experience something like that. But bugs in general, mosquitoes, flies, gnats, things that will get into your food. You're going to track sand and dirt and mud into your van because you are walking in it all day long if you are a hiker or an explorer. So having sand on your bed or in your clothing, you know, that gets really old. You know, when you're trying to live in a van, of trying just to stay clean. It's very, very difficult. A lot more difficult than I thought it would be. Just those little things that just kind of gnaw at you physically. So ways to navigate around that are, you know, really important. How are you going to face those situations when they come up? Another thing that I've found on my journey is this really important question that you have to ask yourself if you are traveling alone, obviously, is, am I able to be alone? Am I capable of traveling on my own? Am I capable of being far away from home, from family, from friends? Am I capable of being in an area where I've never been before? And if something happens to me, if something happens to my van, what do I do? I really recommend that people watch my video, A Day in the Van Life. It kind of touches on the mundaneness of travel when you're kind of in between destinations, if that makes sense. You know, a typical drive day for me, getting groceries, doing my normal routine that I would. I highlight a lot of that in that video. I'll put that down here underneath my face, but I really tried to showcase in that video just the silence of van life, especially when you're traveling alone, and how my morning and nighttime routine looks. And I think that might give you a better picture of what it's like when you're just kind of in between. Do I have a trusted support system? Do I have people in my life that I can trust with my location, my itinerary? Do I have someone in my life that I can trust to be a support system for me? Another very important question along those lines is, do I have a basic knowledge of medical care? So what do I do if I'm in a medical emergency? What happens if I get poison ivy? What happens if I, get a splinter? What happens if I get stung by a bee? These are all very small things, but some people don't know what to do in those situations. So maybe a medical guidebook in your van, or just doing the research about like basic first aid, making sure I have the right things in my van to utilize if that situation ever comes up. Another thing that I think is really important is, how easy are you able to adapt to changing situations? Are you able to accept change? A lot of times in van travel, things change daily, and there are road closures, there are detours, there are times where you're stuck in traffic, and it's not always just kind of driving from A to B. There are a lot of different variations in between that may stumble you up or may cause you some issues. So how easily are you able to deal with those types of things? Do I know how to prepare food? And do I know how to prepare and store food safely? And people don't always think about this, certain proteins, certain meats need to be cooked to a certain temperature, and in order for you to eat them, in order for you to consume them safely. And you also need to understand how to store those items safely so that they don't make you sick. One thing that I ran into was, I had food in the van that was experiencing very extreme temperature changes. So when I was in the East Coast, I was in a pretty cooler climate, and then I was in Florida, and then everything was kind of hot again. And then I went back up into Tennessee, and then everything kind of got cold again. And then I was down into Texas, and everything got hot again. And then out west, everything was hot during the day, cold during the night. So I had food that was constantly fluctuating, and that really does a number on your food. Food is not meant to fluctuate in temperature like that. And it's really shortens its shelf life. It affects it. It's kind of like beer that has been cooled and then warmed and then cooled and then warmed. it's not good, and it can potentially make you very sick. So you have to think about, how am I going to store food properly and safely at a constant temperature, no matter what climate I am driving in? Very, very important. Lastly, you know, this question always comes up: am I comfortable sleeping in a strange area? Am I comfortable parking and overnighting in maybe an area that's a little sketchy, an area that you might not feel super safe in? I have slept in parking garages, I've slept under bridges, I have slept in national forests where no one or nothing was around me, just forest and a dirt gravel road. I have slept in the middle of the desert with no one around me, potentially unsafe places. I've slept in urban areas where, you know, there might be a strong crime presence. Carjacking and car break-ins is always something that you have to kind of keep in the back of your mind when you are parking more in an urban area. If there are a lot of people around, say at like a truck stop, or maybe a business where people are kind of around, you know, am I able to overnight in areas that I might not always feel safe in? If you have it in your mind that, okay, by the end of today, I know where I want to be, this is where I'm going to end up. And once you get there, you realize that, oh, the parking lot has a lot of trash in it. There's some people walking around. The parking lot's not very well lit. So how are you going to navigate that? How are you going to plan around that? How are you going to say, okay, so now what? What do I do? Where do I go? Where else, especially if you're in an area where you've never been before, where do I go that's going to potentially feel safe? But these are just some things that I wasn't necessarily prepared for when I started my journey, and I had to learn them throughout the process. And things that I didn't see on YouTube, and things that I didn't hear other van dwellers talk about readily. So hopefully this helps everybody. Hopefully this gives you some ideas of what to do. Hopefully this puts some questions into your mind about your own journey, and hopefully you can answer them as honestly as possible to determine whether or not this is something that you really want to do. You know, van life isn't for everybody. It's not always easy. It's not something that is always a positive experience. But I think that's one of the beautiful things about van life, is it changes from day to day, just like normal life. And you really don't know what to expect. And each day is a new experience, and it's an experience to learn as well. So again, I just encourage people to do their research, do their due diligence, answer some of these questions for yourself. But most importantly, have fun. Give it a shot. Try. If it's not something for you, that's okay. At least you tried it. If it is something for you, that's great. Hopefully you start your own YouTube channel and you can share with everybody what you're doing and where you're going, just like I have. And I've had a blast. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end this video. Thank you for making it to the end. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for watching Traveling McGee. Me and Bobby, we are still exploring, doing fun stuff. So until I see everybody on the next video, take care and happy travels.